All right, everybody, let's do some CSS. So what we have in front of here right now is the family recipes HTML that we did in last week's lesson. So in your week 4 folder, create or just basically copy and paste over the same recipes.html code that we left off with last week. If you still need that code or at least the text to go in it, you can go back to the week 3 material and also watch the video on how we kind of converted that into HTML. So this is what we have here. This is what our website should look like at this point. So there's absolutely no style, and you can see here by our HTML that there isn't any CSS in here. There is no external CSS file. So that's the first thing we are going to do, is create a new file. And what I'm actually going to do is just duplicate this and rename it recipes.css. Now I open that. We obviously have to get all the HTML out of here. And just so I know, we'll save that as a CSS file. Okay, so now we have our recipes.html and our recipes.css. But since nothing is linked up, we're still just our standard page here. So we need to go ahead and add our style sheet. So we need to add a new link element to the head of our HTML file, and let's just leave it like that. And we need to set the link relationship, this attribute rel or relationship, to style sheet. And our href needs to point at our recipes.css file. Now, since these are both living in the same directory and we always want them to reference them, they'll always live in the same directory, so we want them to always just reference one another, we can just type in the name of the CSS file, which in this case is recipe.css, or excuse me, recipes.css. And then media, we can just make this screen for right now and save that. So now if we refresh, we should still say the same, but our CSS should be linked up. And we can test that by adding a background color. And there you go. You can see that dim. That's actually probably a really bad background color to demonstrate on video. Let's try it black. Okay, there we go. So now we know things are working. Let's leave that at white. Okay, so we need to start adding some CSS to this document. We need to start styling it. But first I want to just take a brief look at what exactly makes up a CSS rule. So the combination of a selector and properties and values are what are going to make up a CSS rule. So in our case here, we have a body rule, which, if we flip back to our HTML, will affect everything within the body. So we're writing HTML that's going to affect everything, the body tag and everything below it. Now that's not saying that all of these elements will inherit everything we add to the body. I'm saying the body element contains all of these elements. So if we say put a background element on body, that's going to essentially put a background element on the entire page. So this is our CSS selector. Body, in this case, is our selector. And then within our brackets, we have the CSS property that we want to modify. And then we have a value of what we want the property to be changed to or be set to. And that value can be a pixel measurement, it can be a hex code for a color, it can be a color word. There are lots of different CSS values, and we'll get through a lot of those as we go through this class. So right now then, this CSS rule has selected the body element and is setting its background to white. And if we refresh our page, we can see that that is clearly true. So there are different types of selectors. We could also select all the paragraph tags, or we could select all the unordered lists, or we could even select all the sections within an HTML file. So we also have what are called class selectors. And a class selector, if we have a class on a particular element, and I don't believe we have one in here, so let's just add a class here called our title. Save that. Okay, so a class selector is a CSS selector that selects all the elements of a particular class in your HTML document. So if I wanted to style all the H2 elements with the class r.title, all r-title, I would use the class selector, which is a dot in CSS, r-title, and then add my rule to that. So in this case, we could say something like, let's go color, we'll make it a light gray. And now you can see that that has been changed to a light gray. So you could also, because a class is reusable, and we talked about this last week, our classes can be reused. So anytime you use a class in an HTML element, you can reuse that in other places. So in this HTML file, I can have as many elements as I want with the class rTitle. Now, up here, like in this section where you have an ID, only one ID can be used in this HTML file, or one unique ID. So the ID recipes is unique to this section. So I could not call article, I could not do this. This would be illegal. Now, would my site still work? Yes, my site would still work. But if you were to run this through a validator, you would get an error because you cannot duplicate IDs like that. The only way we could do this is if this was a class and not an ID. So we'll get rid of that. So we could, if we wanted to, only select H2s that have the class rTitle. So we could do something like h2.rTitle, and that would only select H2s. Now, to give you an example of that, if I only wanted to style paragraphs with the rTitle class, then I could do p.rTitle, and you can see that this would revert back. But for now, we're just going to do a global selector for all classes of rTitle, and we'll leave that how it is. So the other type of selector I have is the ID selector, and we were just looking at that in the last frame there, and you can see here I have a section with an ID recipes. So if I want to make a modification or change a style related to that particular article or that particular section, that's a section, then we use the # recipes, the same bracket format. And now I can do something like add a background to that. And now you can see this recipe has a background. Maybe a better property would be a border. Maybe a 5-pixel solid. There we go. Also add some padding. And that'll be a good place for me to talk about the box model really quick. So in the previous video, we talked about the box model. And this recipe area is a good demonstration of that. So you can see that we added a border around the outside. And before I added that padding in, so if I take that out, you can see that my content hugs right up against this border, except for my H2 up here, which has some default styling. But you can see even my table down here butts right up against. So if I want to add space between my content and that border, I have to use padding. See how that works? Because if I use the margin, which is the other way to add space around content, it's going to add it to the outside of the border, and it's not going to give me the it's not going to give me the look I want. Now, what this does do is it brings it away from the edge of the page, which is a good thing. So you might want to consider using both margin and padding to get the desired look that you want. We can make this look even better with just a really light background. So there you go. Now, this is pretty much the exact exactly what I drew up on the whiteboard in the previous video in terms of how the box model interacts. Now I want to go through these different CSS properties here and just point out a few things. So first of all, our border property takes a couple of different arguments here. We have the width of the border, what type of border it is, so we could do dashed here, and now we have a dashed border, and then the color of that border. And the colors are hex codes, or you can use your color keywords, which are keywords like red, blue, black, yellow, green. Basic colors you can just enter right in there to change. Now, our margins and paddings, I explained this in the earlier video, but I'm not sure if it was entirely clear. Basically, our margin, if we just put one value in here, and this goes for margin and padding, it will apply that evenly around the outside of our, or around the inside and the outside of our content. Now, if I want to, I can adjust where that, on which side that padding happens. So say I wanted to do different padding on each side. I could put 20 pixels on the top, 30 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and 30 pixels on the left. And now you can see that my padding has changed a little bit. I have more padding on the left and right than I do in the top and the bottom. So just remember, it's top, right, bottom, left in the order of how you specify the padding. And this will work with your margins too. It's the same setup. So there you go. And just to illustrate this box model a little bit better, we can use our web inspector in Chrome, and we can actually take a look at the box model in action. So if we hover over this entire section, you can see in the orange we have our margin, and the dashed line in between, or closer to the content, we have our border. Then in the green we have our padding, and then in the blue we have our content on the inside. So it's just like I drew up on the whiteboard. It's the box model, and hopefully this illustrates a little bit more how that works. So in the next video, we're going to kind of erase this and actually start in on making this look a little bit more presentable, and we'll go from there. So I'll see you guys in the next video.